My name is Dan Young, and I'll be your guide today for about an hour. And our focus is really going to be speaking about what is the most challenging aspect of this new version of the examination. And the thing that I want to stress is this exam is actually quite a bit more straightforward than the previous exam. But there's a big caveat to that. So the multiple choice questions are easier. So this new version that came out, and it came out, a little over a month ago, about 5 weeks ago. That's what I'm going to call the 09 version that will eventually fully replace the 08 version. And this certification, CompTIA Network Plus, has been a cornerstone of IT certification since the 90s when it was conceived. And I've been attuned to IT and networking since the 90s. And it really has a lot of staying power. It has relevance. And this new version is actually a better version of the exam. It focuses on more real world than the prior version. It's not a perfect exam, but no exam is perfect from any vendor. And today we're going to be speaking about the most challenging aspect of the certification, but I actually don't know why you're here. I don't know why you're here not watching the opening ceremony of the Olympics, which, there's an opportunity cost to attending a presentation such as this. So I'm curious, why are you here? This is going to help me understand a little bit more about the audience today. I have really deep familiarity with this new version of the exam. I've had the first version of the exam that I ever got was actually in like 2004, as I was focused on Cisco. I got a lot of certifications in the 90s, but it was more A+ and Cisco related. But this new version of the exam is a pretty good one. Okay, so CBDA. All right. Glenn's saying got CCNA in 2002. Awesome. Okay, so maybe a few are thinking about taking it in the next 2 months. Few are planning on taking it in the next year. Considering it. Peers and coworkers, awesome. Okay, so that'll tell you a little bit about the fellow peers that have joined this presentation as well. And usually when I teach the Network Plus exam, I'd say always, there's a spectrum of experience, wide-ranging spectrum of experience. You have people who've been in the industry a really long time and just haven't focused on the certification or never closed the gap on it. And then you have some relatively newcomers to the certification. It is much more approachable for newcomers, but like any certification, they don't make it easy. They do require you to know some stuff. And the meaningful stuff in this exam, the stuff that is covered, focused on, that they'll pick you apart on, is actually more relevant than the prior versions of this certification. So that's really cool. I got my Barrett got Novell certified in the 90s. I got a Novell certification like in 1998. So I'm there with you, but I didn't do so great on the adaptive Novell certifications in the 90s. They were tough. Okay. So this is not the first presentation we've done on Network Plus, and it won't be, in fact, the last. So just full disclosure, our debut, I'm an instructor at StormWind Studios. Our debut of the new version of the exam and the coverage for this exam is going to start in basically a week and a half. Okay, so like August 5th, I think, is a Monday. August 5th will be the debut of our coverage for the new version. And I just rolled through all 13 chapters and made some finishing touches on that. We're ready to go. And when I focus on the certification, I want to make sure that you're going to breeze through the multiple choice questions in as much as you can. Sometimes they're going to be challenging for the way that they're worded. Sometimes it's an unusual question and it's based on the author's experience. But a different set of individuals, clearly a different set of individuals, created what are called performance-based questions. Basically, these are the simulations, okay? So simulations are not new in CompTIA certifications. They've been around, probably 2.5 decades, if not more. Every time they rev the certification, sometimes they carry over, sometimes they create net new. My experience is these are all net new. All of the sims are net new, which means if you've gone through old, maybe practice exams for 08, they're not going to be directly helpful, and they're pretty tough, okay? The prior presentation I did on Network Plus was basically to educate how things work and how to approach the exam. Just I'll cut to the chase on that a little bit. These will take you so much time that it's going to super stress you out, okay? I have a lot of experience in networking, got my CCIE, that's expert certification, well over 2 decades ago. I've been a Cisco instructor, CompTIA instructor, that's my jam. Networking is my focus. And there's a lot of cognitive overload that you're going to experience in the exam for the simulations. That's a very different story from multiple choice. The multiple choice are super straightforward, way more straightforward than they used to be. But the sims, where you're going to be interacting with the experience, those are going to be tricky. So they're drag and drop, fill in the blank, and they have there's so much to them that it's actually pretty sort of immediately overwhelming. What's good about this, though, is they are partial credit. You can fight your battles, and the strategy that I am going to teach in a full-blown course and one that's on strategy is skip the performance-based questions, which are front-loaded. It's going to be the first 6, and then go through the remaining 74 questions, multiple choice. They're going to be much quicker to answer, and then use the time that you banked to go into the performance-based questions. So you can use whatever strategy you want. In retrospect, that's what I wish I had done. I didn't do that when I sat this exam a few days after it came out. And I was looking at the time going, how many of these are there? I'm going to run out of time. And I'm a very fast test taker. I usually slow myself down so I don't trigger warnings on the test. It's just kind of a byproduct of having taken a lot of tests, and I'm a good test taker. Okay, so let's have a little bit of look at just multiple choice questions, just so you see the kind of style. So these really map to the multiple choice questions, and I'm doing this just a few times just so you understand the questions are pretty short. They're not super lengthy. You get a feel for, okay, multiple choice questions are going to be a little bit more straightforward. Now, today we're not going to be talking about fiber optic, but if you were looking at this going, you know what, I'm not sure, that's where you're going through a good Network Plus course is going to help you, and focusing on things like, this is going to be a multi-mode fiber, okay, and you can answer these. I'm looking. You don't have to, though. That's not going to be the focus until we get to the performance-based questions. I don't want anybody stressed out, by the way. I don't call on you. So if you're out there and you want to just be super passive, focus on the presentation, that's cool too. That's the way that I roll a lot of times. I don't like to be stressed when I'm trying to learn. So this is a multi-mode fiber thing. Coverage would go over that. And a very standard, this has been part of Network Plus since the dawn of time, is the different topologies. Interestingly, they killed really old topology types like bus topologies, which is great. We have new topologies like spine leaf, which is part of software-defined infrastructure that you're going to see on data center technologies. Okay, so which network topology forces all traffic through a central location? So if you've gone through presentation, you'd be able to think, okay, so that doesn't sound like mesh. That sounds more like star topology. Okay. Dan's asking, what's a collapsed core? It's the enterprise composite network model that that does not have a core. So we teach access distribution core, but in a smaller campus network, you can eliminate the core and you can connect up the distribution layer devices together. That works really well in a smaller environment. That's actually, if you look at the 09 objectives from CompTIA, it's called out, by the way. But the focus of this question is star, okay? All right. Few more things just to kind of level set. Let's say we're going deeper into the curriculum and we're going to be asked multiple choice questions on things like dynamic routing. One of the things that we do in our course is we do highlight different sections because the reality is Network Plus, the spectrum of coverage, if you look at the objectives, it's a mountain of information, like Border Gateway Protocol. I've taught full courses on BGP. There's enough information for a very large full course. So it's important to understand the level that we're going to be focused on, the level that we're going to be tested on, and I want you to look. So for EIGRP, this is one of the routing protocols. So you see things like successors and feasible successors. For OSPF, the communication modality is multicast. Again, the focus of today is to not focus on the multiple choice. We're just warming up. So if we were going through the presentation in a full class, you'd probably find this is a more straightforward question. OSPF does use multicast communication primarily, okay? And so, yeah, there you go. And it's great that we get to talk about routing protocols in a networking course. And then one of the other things that we highlighted was, hey, this concept of feasible successor. By the way, when I sat this exam, feasible successors are part of EIGRP. I know EIGRP really well. It's a Cisco tech, and I've known it for 25 years inside and out. I was super surprised that they asked this question. Why? Because if something comes up on the exam, you don't necessarily know what they're going to stress, okay? And this is actually kind of a second tier mechanism of EIGRP. I probably wouldn't have stressed this had I not, and that's one of the things that is just part of the nature of the beast, is there's got to be a stress towards what's important. Okay, so we're 13 minutes in. That's to give you a warm fuzzy, okay? And it wasn't so you knew those things, but I want you to see the multiple choice questions, and these are really parallel to actual exam questions. They're not the actual exam questions, but they're pretty close, okay? So those are, if you've gone through a networking course with the right emphasis and it's a current course, you're going to do well on the multiple choice questions. Then we have to set the stage about the performance-based questions, okay? And those are interesting, okay? Now we're going to get into the specific topics that are going to be focused on, and it's not all of the topics in performance-based questions, but what we're going to do now, starting 15 minutes into the presentation, is we are going to be focused on the core information that is going to be relevant for individuals who are thinking about sitting this exam. And this is not exhaustive. Unfortunately, I can't get you fully prepared in 1 hour. But what it will do is it'll give you some perspective on the information, what the approach is, what you have to know, and being informed is really going to reduce your stress level on the exam. Okay, I think that's really important. Even I was stressed when I sat this exam, and I was stressed because I'm like, I'm giving a presentation in like 3 days on it because this is my second presentation on this. And I'm like, I better pass. And you never know. You never know. You might have a bad day. I passed with flying colors, but you know what? It was still stressful for me. So let's go over a little bit about Ethernet. okay? And this actually is I think it's actually some pretty good information on Ethernet that we have, and I want to go over this. So in a networking course, I think it's pretty important to cover things like cabling, physicality of it. We know that layer 1 of the OSI model, the connectivity, the physical layer, is important, and if you get it wrong, there's no hope of getting it to work right, okay? So I'm going to take myself off screen. I'm still here. And I want you to help me out. On the next page, I'm going to reveal the types of cables that these are, but let's have some fun, okay? If we're going to pretend like this is exam prep, and it actually, it's an hour on things that are relevant to the exam, what are these 3 different cable types? And we could go from left to right. So cable 1, cable 2 in the middle, and cable 3. So what kind of cable is on the left-hand side? And I want you to see these pins. This is, in fact, how a cable tester result that you are going to be interfacing with on the exam, that's how it's going to look. It's going to be pin 1, 2, 3, 6, 4, 5, 7, 8. And you think, well, wait a minute, that's got to be a typo, right? Some people are going to see this as a typo. And it is not, okay? So for everybody hearing me, I really need you to pick up something. Even though this isn't a full course, for these, I've got like 7 examples of cables, all of the possible cable conditions you could have. Pins 1 and 2. Now, this is all UTP, right? Unshielded twisted pair cabling. Unshielded twisted pair. We have pairs that are twisted, okay? Pin 1 and 2 are twisted together. 3 and 6 are twisted together. 4 and 5, 7 and 8, regardless of how they're pinned out, okay? Regardless of how they're pinned out, pins 3 and 6 should be in the middle of the cable, twisted together. We're talking about the middle of the cable, not how it's terminated. And so graphically, it is okay to represent it this way. It threw me off. I'll tell you, it threw me off on the exam. I'm like, all right, I'm just going to use what I know about it. And because usually when I'm teaching it, it's usually 1 through 8. That's the Cisco convention, how they teach cabling. But it's super appropriate also to show it this way. So I don't have an objection. It's actually easier to teach some of these things this way. Okay, so cool. We got some answers coming in. Crossover, straight through, and rollover cable. So let's actually go over these, okay? So a crossover cable is, it's absolutely used in Ethernet, and we're going to use it when we are connecting 2 switches together. There's a little bit more to it than that, but for the examination purposes, a crossover cable builds what is called a cross. You can actually see that cross where the send and receive pairs are swapped. For instance, when I'm speaking to you, I speak into my microphone. It comes out your earpiece. So it doesn't come out your mouthpiece, right? So when I'm speaking into a cell phone, I'm speaking into the microphone. It comes out the earpiece. That is something that's important. When you ingest communication, it is expressed on the other side, okay? And so a crossover cable is used between 2 different switches, okay? So if we're using, and you will use, a cable tester in the examination, you'd be looking at pinouts. Now let's say we are presented with an interface that gives us the ability to use a cable tester. I would want you to click on every link. Let's say you're presented with a topology where you have to look at a lot of stuff, like 20 different network connections. You would literally go through and say, is this right? Okay, so yeah, you're not physically given a network, but you're given the next best thing. an interface that allows you to use cable tester. So crossover cables are used for switch-to-switch connection, straight through for basically everything else. So normal connectivity is not going to need the cross to be done by the cable itself. And then the rollover cable, you're not going to use that for Ethernet. Okay, so if you were to see this expressed in the cable tester, that's absolutely not the right thing. Okay, that is not the right thing. Okay, I'm just resetting something here. Just want to make sure I'm not timed out in my lab setup. Okay, so rollover cable. It's 1 to 3, 2 to 6. And that would be true for like a fast Ethernet connection, but it's also accurate to have the other two pairs if you want, okay? So if you were crossing all 4 pairs, you would have the others cross similarly, Anthony. And it's fine to talk about it that way, okay? When I used to teach it in Cisco, it was just 1 to 3, 2 to 6. But this is pretty relevant for anybody taking Network Plus. Don't be surprised by the other 2 pairs. Okay, so rollover cables, that's used to admin through a serial connection. So it's not Ethernet at all. So if somebody happened to use that kind of cable, well, then they would have botched the physicality of it. It's got no hope for working. And the way that rollover cables go is 1 to 8, 2 to 7, 3 to 6, okay? And so it kind of fans it over. Yeah, this is 568B. It's just 568B with 4 pairs. And we got the question, is rollover used often? It's used anytime you are plugging in. You're generally going to be, let's say it's a router or switch, and you've got your laptop, you've got a USB connection, you need to connect up to it for management. We would call that out-of-band management. Out-of-band meaning it's not part of the data network. You're adminning it. It does have an RJ45 jack, and so it could be confused. It could absolutely be confused for an Ethernet cable. Okay? Yep, usually it's a blue flat cable, but, the question writer seemed to have some experience in seeing it being done wrong. Yep. Okay. Now we've got what I'd say is even more unfamiliar, okay? Let's look at this. So all of these conditions are problematic. Specifically problematic for a straight-through cable, okay? So if the cable tester shows you one of these things, you'd want to be a little bit familiar with what the meaning is. Okay? Cool. I appreciate the chat there, Barrett. So let's look at the way that we would decode this. Slight kind of interpretation here. So you might see the cable tester differentiate between split and reversed. It's a little bit different than the chat, but close enough. So reversed means that we've actually accidentally terminated 2 different pins erroneously that are in the same pair. Remember I said this is oriented, the first 2 pins here are a pair, 3 and 6 are a pair, 4 and 5 are a pair, 7 and 8 are a pair. So there is a difference between reversed and split, where we've broken the misconfiguration out of a pair, okay? We've broken it out of a pair. So if you're looking at it and saying, I don't see the difference between these except for it's a little bit further down, notice that Pin 1 and 2, that would be a pair. 3 and 6, that would be a pair. But wait a minute, we're leaving our pair, hence the split. Open, meaning we've got no connectivity, no continuity over a pin. It could be any of the pins, okay? They would call that open. And then accidentally jam and, we've got the connectors touching, maybe on pin 2, we would call that short, okay? Cool. So yet another thing that is actually really, really useful. So imagine this, you're presented with a diagram, very sophisticated, way too many connections. The strategy is, at least among other things, because there are multiple things you're going to be touching, and we're going to go over some of those other things, is click on every link and look for the cable tester to reveal something interesting, one of these things. And you say, all right, that looks like it's an open connection. That looks like it's a rollover cable. Is that a crossover cable? Is that used right in the topology? That would be the sort of thing that I would want you to be doing. Now, let's have some fun in Cisco. Now, what's very interesting about this to me is there is more emphasis for Cisco commands that are diagnostic. Now, I want to level set everything here. CompTIA is not Cisco. There are multiple vendors that create good quality network gear, okay? And some people are switching off of Cisco. My jam, my background is absolutely Cisco. But I understand that, not everybody uses it. That's okay. Juniper is another big brand, Extreme Networks, some of which are even partners of ours. Okay. So, let's go through some commands that are going to be super important. Thanks, B. Carson. What are the Cisco commands that I would expect you to know? So first, they're all explicitly mentioned in the exam objectives, and we're going to go through them in the live interface. Okay? So I'm connected up to some gear, and we'll just clear that off. There's a few commands that you should really know, and it caught me off guard because let's say you're logged into your own infrastructure. You know how to work with your own infrastructure, and not everybody has to interface with Cisco gear. You could be a network professional and do everything in the GUI, or do everything in a different command line interface. So I'm going to give you a few commands that you absolutely need to kind of be able to type. You will be typing these commands, and it's a little disconcerting. So the first thing that you're going to want to do before, let's say you are presented with network interface, as in you are able to type in commands on the exam, and you can, okay? But they're not full-blown devices. You're not interfacing with real gear. They're simulating gear, and they do kind of an okay job at it. The first thing that you should be doing is, actually help me out. How do you get a listing of commands on a Cisco device? Because when you're in these simulated environments, you're like, I don't even know what they've enabled and what they've configured and accounted for and what they haven't. Okay, so question mark. Great. So the question mark works on the exam. Okay, so that's the first thing. When you are interfacing with routers and switches, layer 2 switches, layer 3 switches, and routers. That's what you're going to be interfacing with along with a Windows host. And Windows hosts are a little bit easier, but you might do like an IP config or an ARP-A. So question mark is your help, is your way of getting the listing. And what's interesting is they're going to just tell you what commands they have enabled for. So it's not going to be the laundry list. They're not trying to simulate every command here. It's going to be the laundry list. That is a big thing. So be familiar with the way that you remind yourself of the commands that they would have encoded. Okay. Now, this is a switch that I'm on. So what we're going to do is I want to emphasize a few of the commands that you're going to be using. So the first one is show MAC address table, and I'm going to put in dynamic. They don't have the dynamic flag on the exam, but what is this? So MAC address table is the way that the switch is able to forward specifically down to the correct ports. It's going to send it to one port and not the rest when it's unicast traffic. And I want you to see a few things here, because what you're going to be doing is you're going to be gleaning things like an IP address and what VLAN that's part of and where it lives in the topology table. So you're going to use this as a way of assembling a picture of how things are. So you would want to know, okay, I can do show MAC address table, and what this is going to do is going to tell me this MAC address to this port, but it also tells you which VLAN that MAC address is a part of. That is also going to tell you, oh, that MAC address is a part of, let's say, VLAN 421 or 11 or 88. I don't have all of those other ones here, but you can see that you can see the pairing of the VLAN to the MAC address at this point. Okay, what if I wanted to see IP to MAC address pairing? Help me out. What if I wanted to see IP to MAC address pairing? What would be the command that would allow me to do this? Because I don't see IP addresses here, but let's just say I was tasked with saying, all right, this IP links to this part of the topology hanging off of port, let's say 45 or wherever, okay? Where am I going to see? Okay, so great. And that syntax matches the test objectives. I actually think just say show ARP. Well, what you're going to be doing is show IP ARP, okay? Now I'm going to do this command, show IP ARP, and it doesn't, you know what? It doesn't have a full list here. That's not really all that helpful. I don't see most of the MAC addresses. Can anybody help me out? What's going on here? Why am I not able to see a multitude of IP to MAC pairings? And really, everything we're talking about here is relevant. So let's say you're sitting the exam, you don't have that really deep familiarity with how switch's MAC address table works, what commands are going to be available, and the pairing of those different. Okay, great. So this is actually a layer 2 switch. This is Network Plus, okay? And so it's important to understand the differentiation between a layer 2 switch and a layer 3 switch. Layer 2 switches don't need to even have IP addresses to do their job. They forward exclusively based on IP address, and even the one ARP message is just for management. So you might be able to manage this device over 172.16, okay? So let's go to a device that actually does give me a little bit more information. So I'm going to go to a layer 3 switch. Distribution layer, D. Distribution layer switches generally have IP addresses. They're going to be a lot more interesting to look at. And so you can see the pairings of IP address to MAC addresses. So now I want you to think to yourself, I might have to pair a MAC address with an IP address and the interface that it lives. And so I would call this like layer 2 and layer 3 Sudoku. You know, when you're playing that game of Sudoku and you fill out the numbers, there's a little bit of puzzle or sleuthing that you have to do on this examination. This is really well done on the exam. It's kind of an unusual task. In the real world, I don't find it super useful to look at MAC address tables day in and day out. That would be an unusual thing to do on the exam. But if you know show IP ARP, show MAC address table, and then show VLAN brief, which you would also get coverage of in any exam, you're going to know those things, okay? So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because I've already shown you some of those slides. Let me take myself off for a moment. Okay, just going to go here. Now, one of the things that I want to show you is a bit about IP. So there's some interesting changes that the exam authors made for coverage. It used to be that we didn't really have to know subnetting to a great length. I love teaching subnetting, please don't get me wrong. But what they would focus on is exclusively this mask gives you this many hosts. You could boil every question down in the old version of this mask gives you this many hosts. Okay. Now there is CIDR, route summarization, and VLSM, and it's using the longest match rule. Now, all of those things, that's a lot. Okay. For somebody who knows that stuff, it's going to be easy. But this is all the advanced stuff of IP prefixes, IP subnets, and how to route for them. So it's a huge shift. So let me kind of warm you up to what we're going to get into. If you were going for your Network Plus, you would have to know subnetting really well. That hasn't changed that much, but it is deeper and it's got a different focus. So you might be working with masks that are unusual. You might have /22s, /23s, /24s. And notice what we have here. The most common mask that exists is a /24. Okay? Here we have a graphical depiction of an entirety of a subnet. But what's subnetting about? It's about dividing a network space, an IP address space, into smaller subportions. We call those subnets, okay? So if I were to extend the mask by an individual bit, taking that mask of /24 to taking it to 25, that is part of the things that we can do and control in subnetting. And I want you to see how this reacts, okay? So if I extend it to 25, I've subdivided it. And if I extend it again, I've taken it from 1 subnet to 2 to 4. And this is the sort of thing that we could get into. In fact, I'm going to have an entire presentation on subnetting in August for free, another one of our live events. Okay. So, and Barrett, are you saying the VLSM and CIDR is twisted? I'm not sure what you're referring to, but it's pretty crazy. I love teaching VLSM, but we don't even really teach aggressive VLSM in CCNA. ChatGPT saying CIDR and VLSM is so much easier than class-based. Okay, love it. So now let's get into, so kind of warmed you up. We're going to look at masks for a little bit. Okay. So if you were sitting this exam, it is really cool to know a bit about IP. Lose my, looks like I lost. Okay. I'm going to go to CIDR report. Okay. So it's totally okay in a networking class, in a networking certification, to emphasize 2 things. And the examination, going from the old version, really didn't go over CIDR route aggregation, and things of this nature. But I want to share with you a little bit. It's going to open up your mind to this, okay? Today, we're not going to cover everything about CIDR and things like that, but I want to show you something really cool. Okay, so I've gone to CIDR Report. This is a pretty established website, so although it looks kind of rinky-dink, it's a super good website. And in it, it would have things like the nature of the internet. Okay, so let's talk about the internet. How many routes? Routes are what routers deal with. They are aware of where networks are. How many routes exist on the internet today? We have about 1 million what are called prefixes, and prefixes is basically just the subnet IDs paired with the subnet mask, okay? So a prefix is just a network. If you haven't heard that term, that's fine. It's no big deal. So nearly 1 million prefixes aggregated, shrunk down to about half as much. Classless interdomain routing says, don't pay attention to class A, B, and C. Don't worry about it. Doesn't matter. Class A, 8 bits, class B, 16, don't worry about it. We work in a vacuum, agnostic of class, okay? And aggregation is the ability to represent multiple prefixes simultaneously. Multiple prefixes simultaneously, okay? So let me show you a little bit about this. I'm going to go down towards Amazon's. I'm going to go into Amazon's, what is called autonomous system, okay? Amazon, we know it like AWS. They are one of the biggest users of prefixes, okay? This is all public available information, so I'm not doing anything crazy here. So I'm going to drill in, and this is an amazing thing. I'm going to scroll into Amazon's prefixes, and this is going to teach you something that is really useful to be aware of on the exam, okay? So I want you to see how CIDR works with subnet masks, okay? So there's a very interesting entry. There's a /23 that I'm going to highlight. Ooh. Let's not do that. I'm going to highlight it from left to right. Okay. So I want you to see this /23 and notice the green. Okay. So I'm imagining that most of you don't do route aggregation, what is called route summarization all the time. There's an old kind of name for this called supernetting. I don't recommend using it. We normally call this summarization or route aggregation, okay? It's technically accurate to call this supernetting, but shouldn't use that term. Just kind of speaks to you're not experienced with it because everybody calls it aggregation or subnet or aggregation or summarization. I want you to see there's this pattern here that I'm going to show you. I want you to see that there's two what are called public prefixes. These two public prefixes boil down and are aggregated into one. The /23 represents two /24s. I want you to park on that for a moment. The 1/23 represents two /24s. Okay. Is there a pattern to this? Let's look a little bit further. This /23, a little bit deeper down, aggregates two prefixes. But now let's look at the /21. It's a little bit deeper down, okay? So the greens are the route aggregates, and the reds are the member prefixes that are represented with the aggregate. Okay, I want you to see that it's a power of 2 number of networks. 2 to the 3rd is 8. I want you to see 3 to 8, 3 to 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. You are going to be looking at prefixes like /22s on the exam. And it's super important that you understand what a /22 means. And there's actually an easy way that you can train your brain. I'm going to give you a little hint on how to do that. If you have subnets that are /24, the number of bits that you back off is representing the number of networks that you're summarizing. If you back off by 1 bit, you're summarizing 2 networks. If you back off by 2 bits, you back off by 4 networks. And if you back off by 3, you have 8 networks that you are summarizing. It goes 2, 4, 8, 16. And so you could see this /21 and go, I don't even know what that means. But it is 3 bits further removed from the network mask that is aggregating. So if you look, I want you to count. I've got 8 networks. 8 happens to be 2 to the power of 3. In fact, this is how you should think about it. So let me see if I can find a good /22. Okay, an aggregate that's /22. It might not be here. I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. You can see all sorts of masks. And oh, by the way, look at this. This is a really good example of, thinking, I'm not working classfully. I'm not working classfully. So 120.0.0.13, that is aggregating up. Well, let me just see if I can find a better example. Really want to see a /22, so let's go here. So /22 would aggregate 4 subnets, and here we go. So it would aggregate specifically 4 /24 subnets. Okay, so why does this matter? Let's go into some network gear now. See if I'm still connected up. Great, I am. Okay. So ChatGPT is asking, why do we aggregate networks? Okay, so the main purpose is to, so first, the amount of information in RAM of the internet routing table is very impactful. So first, shrinking from about 900,000 routes to 500,000 routes reduces the RAM impact on all of the routers that have to know the entire internet routing table. But there's other things that are massively beneficial. One of the biggest things is stability. So you want to reduce the number of changes that the routing table has to process. And if a member route changes, if one of the summarized routes changes, but the aggregate route endures, that means that all the other routers don't have to hear about it. So that's really good. So let's say there's a flapping network in Amazon. They can constrain that routing update to just their autonomous system because it's hidden and the individual fluctuations are hidden. That's very important to stabilizing networks. So when you talk about improving the performance of a dynamic routing protocol and reducing the CPU, there are a lot of different things that you can use to tune, but the overarching way that you improve routing performance, regardless of the protocol that you use to communicate routing tables, is route summarization. All routing protocols allow you to do route summarization. It's step number 1 of making your network operate well. Okay, and a flapping network is a network that goes up and down, possibly because there's a failing transceiver. Okay. And imagine a flapping network going up and down, and your routers getting consumed with running their algorithms. Like OSPF uses Dijkstra's shortest path first algorithm. It takes some CPU cycles to process that. And if you're processing it all the time, you're actually capable of bringing your network to a crawl. Okay? So, now I want to show you the manifestation of this in the routing table. This is really kind of the culmination of where I wanted to get to. So I want to do a show IP route, and I want to look for some routing table information here. Okay? So I want you to see that I've got some entries in the routing table that are overlapping. I'll kind of give you a hint of where I'm going with this, because you need to be kind of led here. You're going to be looking at aggregate routes, maybe a /23/22. And then you're going to be looking at routing table entries that are more specific, or maybe looking for entries that are more specific. And you have to understand how to read a routing table and understand what this /24 is doing. Okay? So now we're going to take this and I want to show you what's happening. I want you to see, and we're going to focus on these 4 subnets. I have 4 subnets that are being communicated via OSPF, so Dynamic Routing Protocol. I want you to count 4 subnets. There is a route summary that is being generated by this router. That route summary has a /24. Now, what did we learn about the way that a summary route works? If you back off by 1 bit, it's 2 subnets. Okay, so in fact, the /25, let's just look at that. The /25, this is created through an OSPF specific command. That mask is going to summarize just these 2 subnets. Not all that useful, but you're going to see it in the exam. You better know what it is. So that /25 represents 2. Why? Because it's only 1 bit removed. The /24 represents both. Now, this is all going downstream to a different router. It's going to be on branch A. So let me go to branch A. And I want you to see a downstream router that got this routing table update that's looking at the information. Okay? So I want you to see I've got 2 entries that are going to 10/12. Okay. Now I've got a very interesting challenge on my hands. Which of these routing table entries would be used? Which of these routing table entries would be used? Help me out. Does anybody know? Let's say I'm going to 12.1. I'm going to 12.1. Which entry would be used? Okay, so ChatGPT, L. Barrett are saying the same thing. The more specific route. Which one is more specific? Which of the 2 is most specific? /25 is more specific. Okay? /25 is more specific. That is a demonstration of what we would call the longest match rule. The longest match rule states if you're routing to a destination network, use the most specific information possible. For instance, we might know about this thing called a default static route. So, looks like I'm going to look for default static route. This router doesn't have one, but I'm pretty sure our one has one. Look at show IP route. If you've ever wondered what makes a default route work, well, default route is a route that points to anywhere. and it is the least specific of all of the masks. So this route only gets used, the default route only gets used when there's an absence of anything more specific. And generally speaking, routing table entries are going to be a mixture of /20, /21, /22, 3, 4, all the way to /30, okay? Usually most of your subnets are going to fall between, let's say, /24 and /30, okay? So this only gets used. So it only gets used when there's an absence of more specific information. So one of the things that makes this tricky in the examination is now you get a sense of how, we'll flip through a few slides here. Now you get a sense of where some of the more difficult questions come from. Now you might think to yourself, oh geez, you know, some of these questions that we're kind of preparing for, I only feel partially ready for it. Well, go through good material and you're going to see that that being prepared for VLSM is going to be very, very empowering. So I'll show you some graphics that are going to go over that material. Okay. So if you're looking for a visual on what I was doing a demonstration of when we were talking about BGP and Amazon's routing information, one of the things that's going to be really eye-opening and the hardest part of this exam, in my opinion, is being able to work with summaries and understand how a route summary is going to coexist with a more specific route. Okay? That is going to manifest on the examination. And if you're forewarned, you can be armed for that eventuality. Otherwise, you're going to go in there and you're going to be looking at routing table entries and you're going to be like, I don't have the foggiest idea of what's going on. Okay? And just cards on the table. The performance-based questions. Let's say you're going over, if you go through our training, you're going to get coverage of this and we're going to spend loads of extra time on it. If you're going in there and you're not really prepped for CIDR and route aggregation and understanding how to interpret the routing table, you're not ready for it. The performance-based questions are something you want to have a pretty good shot on. They've got multiple choice, or they've got partial credit. They're not multiple choice, but they are partial credit. You want to go in going, I think I'm going to be able to interpret those routing table entries. I think I'm going to be able to interpret that. It's straightforward for me because I can use my experience in networking. But for somebody who's going through a Network Plus certification and they're doing it for the first time, this is the hardest part of it. Now, I've got really good news. Let's just say I scared you off, okay? You can pass the examination and get none of the performance-based questions right. At least based on my math, you could get all the multiple choice questions right, which you're going to get a lot of them right. You're going to get about 90% of them right at least. But the performance-based questions are going to be the part that is going to be the challenging part, okay? And so that's the thing that it's never good to come into an exam knowing that you're not ready for it, okay? If you're aware, though, that that's the area that you're going to have to spend a little bit more time, you're going to be able to... Everybody's going to struggle on those. They're not easy because the interface is really tricky. But after you get the lay of the land on the interface that they have, and we have a bunch of examples in our campus for those examples that are going to be stood up for students, that'll really help you out, okay? So definitely when you're sitting the exam, or if anybody is going out for the new exam, first, understand this new version of the exam is actually more straightforward. 08, the multiple choice questions are doozies. So 09, the easier part is the multiple choice questions. And so what you need to do is you need to think, I'm going to knock those out of the park, and I'm going to do really well on the performance-based questions, but they're not going to sink me. Okay?